Honestly, I don't remember if I've already done a video for the Great Texts playlist on the Discourse on Method by Descartes, but I'm going to do this anyway. The Discourse on Method is a really important book, and if you want to really understand Descartes, you need to read the Discourse on Method and the Meditations on First Philosophy. The Meditations is where Descartes zooms in on his famous method of doubt, and what he doubts, what are the criteria for doubt, what does he discover when he's doubting, and how does he go from the existence of the self to the existence of God, and so on. The Meditations on First Philosophy does that. The Discourse on Method zooms out a bit and gives you a bigger picture of the whole structure of Cartesian philosophy and what Descartes' doing and why he's doing it. Here in this video, I will now briefly summarize what are the main things that happen in this wonderful little book. This is formally titled not the Meditations on First Philosophy, that's the different book, and not the Discourse on Method, but the Discourse on the Method for Conducting One's Reason Well and for Seeking Truth in the Sciences. The short version, Discourse on Method, will work just fine for most of us. There are 6 parts of the Discourse on Method. In part 1, Descartes says that we all have equal intelligence, but we're not all applying it in the same way. We're not all applying our intelligence in an equally useful fashion. What you need is the right method for thinking, and that is what makes intelligence really worthwhile. And most of us are not particularly stupid, most of us are not particularly smart, but all of us will do well if we use the right method. And Descartes says, here in this book, I'm going to give you my method. And he makes some remarkable claims. He overviews his education, and he says some very nice things about his teachers and praises the universities where he studied, and says some wonderful things about theology, philosophy, oratory, poetry, mathematics. He says wonderful things about languages. He says wonderful things about everything he's studied in his education. Understand that Descartes has had the best education available in Europe in his century. It's, the contemporary equivalent, the equivalent in his century of PhD from Oxford and a PhD from Harvard or something like that. He's super well educated for his time, and he praises his education, but he says, more and more, I had discovered my ignorance. He says he was left with having learned nothing from his education except how ignorant he was. All his education served only to show him how he actually doesn't know anything. In fact, he is setting himself up here as very much like Socrates. I think it's intentional. He's setting himself up as the new Socrates, as the person who says, we have discovered no knowledge at all, except for a few exceptions here and there, mathematics in particular. And then, unlike Socrates, who will be content to seek for wisdom his entire life, even if he never finds it, Descartes will not rest. Descartes will not be content until he gives knowledge. And he says, he's going to give it to us. He will get knowledge for himself and give it to us. Descartes is very bold, very audacious. He says, since Socrates, we have made no progress in gaining knowledge, but now we will because of me, because of this book. Congratulations, here you go. What can I say except you're welcome, as the guy said on the movie. In part 2 of the discourse, he goes over some facts about his life and what he was doing, when and where, and how it gave him the opportunity to think, skipping over any number of important points. What he says in part 2 is largely about method. He gives us some pointers on what sort of method is necessary for properly thinking. In fact, let's rewind a bit to part 1. Again, he says, now I'm using the Hackett translation by Donald Kress. He says, I delighted most of all in mathematics, but I did not notice its true use. Well, let me not get ahead of myself. I delighted most of all in mathematics because of the certainty and the evidence of its reasonings. Mathematics provides certainty. But I did not yet notice its true use, and thinking that it was of service merely to the mechanical arts, I was astonished by the fact that no one had built anything more noble upon its foundations, given that they were so solid and firm. On the other hand, I compared the writings of the ancient pagans that dealt with morals to very proud and magnificent palaces that were built on nothing but sand and mud. He says we have some really great moral philosophy, some really great teachings on ethics, but it's not built on a solid foundation. And we have mathematics, which is a solid foundation, but there's no useful knowledge built on it. What we need And this is the point of his remarks on the method for proper thinking in part 2 of the discourse. What we need is a method of thought that will give us the certainty of mathematics and the solid foundation for knowledge that mathematics gives us, but will have the practicality and the usefulness of the moral philosophy from the ancients. And so what sort of method is that going to be? What's going to work? How are we going to do this? Well, briefly, I'll just mention that this is where he lays out the basics of his strong foundationalism. Now, this is a theory in epistemology. I go over it here or there elsewhere on this channel. But briefly, foundationalism is the theory that knowledge has a foundation, which is to say there are some beliefs which serve as evidence for other beliefs, which themselves do not need other beliefs to serve as evidence for them. So I know certain things with certainty, or at any rate with very good and well-warranted confidence, and they are able to be evidence for other things I know, but they don't themselves need evidence. For example, maybe I know that 2 + 2 = 4, and I don't need evidence that 2 + 2 = 4. This is a certain belief, even without evidence. And if I can find the right foundational beliefs that can be known with 100% certainty and can be evidence for other beliefs, then I will be in good shape. And that's what Descartes is trying to do. And that's what strong foundationalism is, briefly, roughly. Strong foundationalism is the version of foundationalism that says we can have a proper set of beliefs, a proper house of knowledge, a proper structure of what we believe if we have a perfectly certain foundation. Lay the foundation right first. Have 100% certain beliefs at the very foundation of knowledge, and use them as evidence for what else you believe. Build up on them using solid reasoning. 100% certain belief, solid reasoning to what it justifies, solid reasoning from those beliefs to what they justify, and evidence at each step of the structure of knowledge based on a solid foundation and building with perfect certainty at each level. That is strong foundationalism, although honestly I think after you get past the first few levels, maybe reasonably good probability is enough for strong foundationalism. Okay, so Descartes is using mathematics as a model here. Mathematics has 100% certain foundations in its axioms, and we build on these axioms with 100% certainty, and Descartes wants us to do this for all knowledge. Well, how the heck are we supposed to do that? And as it turns out, all of our beliefs are, most of them are, as things currently stand, not that good. They're not that well justified. Descartes has inherited so many beliefs from his culture, from his religion. He is a Catholic. He's a French guy and a Catholic in the 1600s, and these people believe things about God, they believe things about life. Everyone believes things about life. Virtually everyone believes something about God, or disbelieves, which is to say, believes something else about God, believe the negative on the subject. And so Descartes believes lots of stuff, but he says we don't have any knowledge in what we believe because of what he's gone over in part 1 of the discourse. More and more I had discovered my ignorance. So we have a lot of beliefs, but they're not built on a solid foundation with solid reasoning. And you could make long lists of the things he'd been taught in the universities, in philosophy and theology especially, that we didn't have really good evidence for. And Descartes says we can do better. And if you are trying to construct a new house of knowledge on a solid foundation, built properly with good evidence from each belief to the next belief that it supports, a certain foundation for knowledge, beliefs that are 100% certain, building on them with good evidence for what they justify with good logic, and what those beliefs justify with good logic, and what those beliefs justify with good logic. So you have a solid house of knowledge you can live in, that is to say, a set of beliefs you can have confidence in and live by because they're properly justified. If you want to do that, but you're starting off with a jumble of poorly reasoned beliefs resting on no certain foundation at all, what are you going to do? What are you going to do if this is your house? If your house is not properly constructed, if there's no solid foundation for your house, and bricks are haphazardly laid in each row, and there's holes between bricks, what do you do if your house is like this? Well, you tear it down. You tear it down all the way to the foundations. Tear up the foundations and start again. And as you rebuild a house, you can use the old bricks, you can use the old beliefs. But the point is to rip the whole thing down and start with a proper foundation for knowledge and build on it properly as you would do for your home. Build the foundation first, tear everything down to get to the proper foundation. So Descartes' plan is going to be doubt, ruthless, systematic doubt. Doubt everything that can possibly be doubted till you find one thing that cannot be doubted, and that thing will be the solid foundation for knowledge. Well, 2 things would be fine, if that's how many you found, but Descartes is going to find 1. 3 would be fine, but he's only going to find 1. And that's what gets done in part 4. But first, part 3 is Descartes' ethics. Descartes' provisional ethics. Descartes gives a provisional code of ethics in part 3 of the discourse. He realizes, rewinding to part 2, that in order to go through his plan of doubting everything and finding the right foundation for knowledge and rebuilding a system of well-organized beliefs based on solid evidence at every level, in order to do this properly, he's going to need some time to think, and until he has time to think, he's going to have to figure out what he's going to believe and how he's going to live in the meantime. And so he comes up with 4 principles of 4 principles by which to live. And the first was to obey the laws and customs of my country, constantly holding on to the religion in which, by God's grace, I had been instructed from my childhood, and governing myself and everything else according to the most moderate opinions and those furthest from excess, opinions that were commonly accepted in practice by the most judicious of those with whom I would have to live, agree with all the smart and important people. That's his first principle. Agree with everyone, for now, and agree with your religion and your country. His second principle, be as firm and resolute in my actions as I could. Follow the most doubtful opinions once I had decided on them with no less constancy than if they'd been very well assured. Live consistently even by thoroughly unjustified opinions, at least until you can rebuild the structure of knowledge from the ground up, from the foundation up, below the ground, if you want to use the metaphor that way. The third maxim, try to conquer myself rather than fortune. Change my desires rather than the order of the world. You will find references in the first 3 sections, the first 3 parts of the discourse, to moral philosophy, some veiled, some thinly veiled, some not veiled at all, a few may be explicit. There are references here to, Epicurus. There are references here to Stoicism and Boethius, or at least references to the same sort of way of thinking. I think some of these are actually very clear references directly to Stoicism. This is a traditional approach. This is the approach of, changing our desires to fit the world rather than vice versa, which is the teaching of the Epicureans, the teaching of the Stoics, the teaching of Augustine, the teaching of Boethius, although in Augustine and Boethius the point is more to redirect our desires towards a higher reality, towards God, who will satisfy all of our desires. That's the Platonic approach, the Augustinian approach, the approach in Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy. But here, in the Discourse on Method, Descartes looks at the way this works with respect to the world, where Augustine and Boethius will tell you, limit your desires for the things of this world, following Stoicism. And Descartes takes this traditional approach to ethics, but it's all provisional. He provisionally takes a traditional approach to ethics. Change your desires to fit the world, not vice versa. And finally, to review the various things people do with their lives and make sure that the task for his life Descartes has chosen is the best task, and that task is the pursuit of wisdom. And it's the right one. It is the best occupation. Now, part 4 is where he gets to the method of doubt. Part 4 is where Descartes doubts everything that can be doubted. If you can imagine that a belief is false, you must not believe that it is true. If you can imagine a scenario in which your beliefs are false, you must stop believing them. If it is possible, however unlikely, if it is possible that your beliefs are false, you must not believe in them. And if anything comes to you from an unreliable source, you must doubt it. You must doubt everything that came from an unreliable source. So Descartes particularly targets the sources of knowledge and the foundations of knowledge, or since he doubts that there's any knowledge at this point, he's targeting the sources of our beliefs, the foundations of our beliefs. And what are the foundations? Well, things like the 5 senses and reason. I believe 2 + 2 = 4 because I trust my reason when I look at the principle 2 + 2 = 4 and I can just see that it is true. Apparently, I'm trusting my reason here. And Why do I believe that there's this green book in front of me? It's because I'm trusting my eyes. Well, my eyes have let me down. I have seen things in bad lighting and the color looked different. The classic example, well, one of the classic examples anyway, is the stick or the oar in water that looks bent. Our eyes can deceive us. Our senses can deceive us. And we seem to have sensory experiences when in fact we are dreaming and we're not having those sensory experiences at all. Or we're having the experiences and it seems like we are perceiving real things when in fact the experience is there and the reality is not behind it because we're dreaming. But can we trust reason? Well, you'd think so, but dang it, reason has let us down too. I have made simple arithmetical mistakes myself, not just when I was a kid learning basic arithmetic, but I once multiplied 3 and 3 and got 12 or something like that. 2010, I think. I was an adult. 2012, I don't know, somewhere around there. And this is what can happen to us. We make mistakes even with reason, even with mathematics. So is it possible that we're always making a mistake? It's not likely, but it's possible, which means nothing in mathematics, nothing on which we trust reason, nothing we get by trusting reason alone is entirely reliable. Reason is fallible. And Descartes, as is pretty well known, imagines that what if instead of God we had a terrible demon who delights in deceiving us? What if the power of God were employed by some sort of demon or godlike Loki character? Not like Loki in Marvel Cinematic Universe, the puny god the Hulk can beat up, but, you know, Loki's personality, but the power of the God of the Bible, somebody like that. What if that person were deceiving us? What would the case be? The case would be everything we believe is suspect. And Descartes doesn't think that is the case, but he thinks the possibility of such a thing proves, well, the fact that we can imagine it, the fact that if it were the case, we would have no true beliefs, proves that none of our beliefs are certain as things currently stand. But there's one thing, even this godlike mischievous demon character would not be able to trick us about, and that is that we exist. Except I can't be talking in plural, can I? Even in the very early stages of this, which is the method of doubt, you have to start doing this by yourself. You have to start doubting that other people exist. Let's go over a few rudimentary steps. Okay, so it's possible that you're on the Truman Show, or since I don't know you exist, it's possible, and you have to say this about me, since you don't know I exist, you have to do this in the first person singular, since I am the one doubting. One thing I can doubt is everyone else. And first of all, first stage, their intentions. I can doubt that their intentions are what they seem to be. Maybe I'm on the Truman Show. Second, I can doubt that they even exist as people. Maybe they are mindless robots. Third, I can doubt that my senses are giving me accurate information. Maybe I'm in the Matrix. Fourth, I can doubt that even my reason is reliable because I could be tricked. Actually, let's rewind back from there. Where are we? Number 4, Matrix. Let's see. We had Truman Show, robots, and then I think we went to Matrix. So, stepping forward, less dramatic step from Matrix, I can imagine not only that the physical world that surrounds me is not real, or that I think surrounds me is not real because I'm in the Matrix. I can imagine not only is that world not real, but even my own body is not real. Not just because what looks like my body is also part of the programming of the Matrix, but outside of the Matrix, maybe I don't have a body either. Well, maybe I don't have most of it. Maybe I'm just a brain. The brain in the laboratory of the mad scientist is a standard philosophical thought experiment, and there's always Descartes in the area when we talk about this thought experiment. What if? What if my body is not what it appears to be? What if people's intentions are not what they appear to be? What if people's existence is not what it appears to be? What if the world around me is not what it appears to be? What if even my body is not what it appears to be? In fact, what if I don't even have the brain? What stage are we on? Which step? I think we're going through some basic steps. I think this is now step 5. What if I don't even have the brain? Not only is my body not what it appears to be, because maybe I'm a brain in a mad scientist laboratory, maybe I'm being deceived by that evil demon character, and I don't even have the brain. Maybe I'm just a mind floating in space. Maybe there's not even space. 6th, 7th, whichever stage of doubt we're in here. Keep going. Maybe I'm just the mind floating in space. Maybe I'm just the mind and there isn't even space. It's just me somewhere, nowhere. Just a mind without space for it to be in. Wherever minds go and there's no space, because what do I know about space? I know nothing at this point, except one thing, which we'll come to in a moment. I don't know 2 + 2 = 4. I might be deceived about all these things I've gone over, about other people's intentions, other people's existence, the world outside, my body, my brain, my existence in space at all. And I could even be deceived with what I think I know from reason. 2 + 2 = 4, 1 + 1 = 2. Well, if this godlike, mischievous character wanted to make me think that 2 + 2 = 5, he could do it. And am I now going to trust that he has not deceived me into thinking 2 + 2 = 4? He could deceive me if it were really the case that 2 + 2 = 5. He could deceive me into thinking 2 + 2 = 4. If this mischievous mischievous character with godlike powers has the ability to make me think 2 + 2 = 5 when it really doesn't, maybe the reason I think it does not is that I've been deceived. Maybe that is the truth. Maybe he's deceived me into thinking 2 + 2 = 4. Everything from reason is doubtful. But even if this creature is deceiving me about everything else, I can still be 100% confident of my existence. This is Descartes' new foundation for knowledge. I exist. How do you know you exist? Well, assuming you exist. How do I, because at this point it's still first person singular, how do I know I exist? Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. As long as I'm thinking, I know I exist. As long as I'm thinking, I can know that I am in existence. And this is the foundation for knowledge. And Descartes has this this interesting argument. I'll give you a brief version of it, I suppose, for the second stage of knowledge. The first stage of knowledge is I exist. This cannot be doubted, he says. That's the 100%, not 99.9%, but the 100% certain fact, which cannot be doubted and which will serve as a foundation for knowledge. Then Descartes tries to build on it. I exist, therefore, stage 2 of knowledge, God exists. And he has an argument for God's existence. Roughly, I look at what I'm thinking, and I find that in my mind, as I exist, knowing that I am a thinking thing, I find that there is an idea of God, idea of a perfect being. And an idea is a thing, and a thing, in order to exist, must have some explanation for its existence. A thing cannot be caused by something less than it. A cause must be no less great than its effect. An effect cannot be greater than its cause. And my idea is an idea of a perfect being. So its effect must be, it as an effect must be caused by something equal to or greater than it. Well, it's an idea of a perfect being, so it must have been caused by a perfect being, and therefore the perfect being must actually exist. And people have concerns with this argument. Perhaps another time, if I haven't already gone over it. I do have videos on the Great Arguments in Philosophy playlist looking at some of Descartes' arguments here. At the moment, I will not look over this argument in any great detail, but Descartes seems to think it works. It's an argument that God exists, based on my idea of God. Again, the foundation of knowledge is I exist. And this is evidence, well, this provides evidence once you examine the content of your thought that God exists according to Descartes' analysis. And the third stage, once you know God exists, gives you pretty much everything else you really need. I exist, therefore, clever argument, God exists, therefore, reason is reliable after all, and the world outside my mind exists and my senses are reliable, and for that matter, other people exist. How do you get to this third stage of knowledge? Well, this is an argument that I think works much better than the first, actually. The argument is that since God is good, I exist, therefore God exists, and this God is a perfect being. I exist, I have the idea of the perfect being, etc., etc., therefore God the perfect being exists. And if God the perfect being exists, then this perfect being would not have made me with massively unreliable faculties. Faculties that tell me 2 + 2 = 4, faculties that tell me there's a green book in front of me, and so on. So I can trust my faculties that were apparently given to me by God. I exist, therefore, clever argument, God exists, therefore, because God is a perfect being, God, perfect in power and in goodness, therefore God would not have given me these unreliable faculties so I can actually trust my reason after all. Now that reason can be trusted, now that the senses can be trusted at this third stage of knowledge, now we can go on with building a proper house of knowledge. We've established the proper foundation. Now, what they call the Cartesian circle is Descartes' big mistake. Now, I do have my concerns with the initial argument for the existence of God. I exist, therefore, because of my idea of God being a perfect idea, an idea of a perfect being. It must have had for its cause the perfect being who really does exist. God exists, therefore reason can be trusted, etc., etc. You see the problem with that. Reason is established at the third stage, but in order to establish the existence of God, you have to make an argument, you have to use your reason. So Descartes' attempt to construct knowledge on this foundation doesn't actually work. Well, you can prove that I exist. That seems pretty safe. But it's difficult to go on from there without some sort of an argument. And if you're doubting reason, you won't be able to make the argument. So Descartes' project is not ultimately, at least not entirely, a success. But really important, really influential. And those of us who are optimists may find quite a bit to like in Descartes. I like a lot of Descartes. I think he's right about a lot. But anyway, what are we doing here? We're supposed to be overviewing part 4. This video is 26 minutes already. I meant to do this briefly. Oh well, such is life. Descartes has established a new foundation for knowledge. And in part 5, he goes into a little more detail on his metaphysics. Part 5 of the Discourse is a classic text on Cartesian dualism. Now, this is the theory that I who exists, the ego, the thing that exists at the that we know about at the foundation of knowledge, the I who thinks and therefore exists, cogito ergo sum, that thinking thing that is known at the foundation of knowledge, that thing is a mind. That thing thinks. And Cartesian dualism says that that thing is not made of matter. One important reason to think that thing is not made of matter is just what's going on in the method of doubt. It's possible to imagine I exist without my body. What is left? Just a mind. You can imagine that you exist not in the space you think you're in because you're in the matrix, not with the body you think you have because you could be the brain in the mad scientist laboratory, not with even the brain at all because you could be the mind floating in space, maybe even without the space because you could just be the mind being deceived by the evil demon, not even in three-dimensional space at all, the godlike Loki character. If that's the case, it seems that what I am, this I that thinks, what I am is a mind and not a body. The mind is not the same thing as a body, and there are other considerations. And Descartes actually talks about the circulatory system, and he talks about how he's done some science. He's done some looking at the bodies of mammals to study how the heart works and how the lungs work, and he describes the circulatory system. And for 1600s medicine, it's not bad, but, you know, you probably, like me, had a better account of the circulatory system in a science class when you were 12 or 13 or 14 or 15 or 16. I can almost remember the colored pictures where the oxygenated blood was red and the deoxygenated blood was blue. We had better account of the circulatory system designed for children. So why is this great philosopher talking about the circulatory system and why should you care? I'll tell you why you should care. You should care because this is how he's explaining his dualism, which, now that I realize I interrupted myself and probably never defined it. I was going to define it earlier. Let me get to that immediately. Descartes' dualism is the theory that there's mind and there's matter, and these are two separate and totally distinct things. The mind thinks and does not occupy space. Matter occupies space and does not think. And what's the connection between those two? Actually, it's an unsolvable mystery, but the reason Descartes talks about the circulatory system is to explain why he thinks matter and mind are distinct. Understand that in pre-modern metaphysics, from Plato through Aquinas, the idea of the world is shaped by a theory called hylomorphism. And hylomorphism states that matter and non-physical reality both exist, and they're connected. Well, let's use the pen. The pen is not purely matter. It's matter plus the essence of a pen. Why is a heap of molecules a pen? I'm now borrowing from some words from Aristotle. Why is it this jumble of molecules a pen and not just a pile of molecules? Because the essence of a pen is there, organizing the matter into a pen. Roughly, that's my attempt to briefly present hylomorphism. And the hylomorphic theory of the human person is that the body is what is animated by the soul, and the soul is what animates the body. In Latin, you can have mens, manes, or mentis, from which we get the English word mental, and this refers to the mind or the soul. But in Latin, you can also have the anima, which refers to the soul, and the anima, whence we get the English word animated, is what animates the body. The anima is what gives life to the body in pre-modern metaphysics. And Descartes describes the circulatory system to say, no, the mind does not give life to the body. The body is a machine. He says, I studied the body. Here is my account of how the body works with respect to heart and lungs. And having studied it, I can conclude none of it is caused by soul. The body functions because of its machinery. The body is just, well, a more complicated piece of clockwork. The body is a physical machine. It's pure mechanism. It's matter operating according to a couple of laws of physics. There's no soul keeping the body going. This is how he argues for his dualism. And this is the second argument for Cartesian dualism from part 5 of the Discourse. And let me try to present it in more general terms. Matter does not explain consciousness. And there's nothing we observe about matter that requires consciousness to explain it or anything else non-physical. Everything in matter we observe seems to be mechanism. Matter, bits of matter, following a couple of laws of physics. That's how we explain things we observe, physically speaking, including the functions of the body, but also, things like this. Here's the pen clattering on the floor. Here's the highlighter clattering on the desk, and that is mechanism. Matter following a couple of laws of physics. No need to appeal to non-physical realities to explain anything we see. Ergo, all matter is just matter. All mind is just mind. There's no connection between the two. That's the general idea of Cartesian dualism and how he argues for it. He can't see any need to suppose any further links between mind and matter, except the one we experience, which is the great mystery in Descartes' metaphysics. The mind does not occupy space. Maybe it doesn't even exist in space. There's nothing about the mind that requires it to. Matter occupies space and does not think. And how do you connect those two? And how is the mind connected to the body? How is it that I see? How is it that I see the green book when the eye that sees it, and a non-physical mind that doesn't even occupy space? It's not taking up a cubic centimeter of my brain. It's not taking up any space in my brain. That's not the thing the mind does. It doesn't take up space. I don't think it even occupies a point in space. But even if it did, how would you explain it? Something that occupies exactly 0, not 0.01, but exactly 0 cubic millimeters of space. How would that be interacting with my brain? That doesn't make any sense. There's no way to account for that. And there's no way in Descartes' metaphysics to account for dualism. To account for the connection of mind and matter, in the connection of mind and matter. But he thinks the connection is there. The self, the person, seems to be just the soul, the mind, the immaterial thing. But the human being is the mind plus the body, and they're closely connected. They're intimately connected, even though Descartes doesn't seem to have any idea how they could possibly be connected. All right. Part 6 of the Discourse on Method. It is now 3 years since I arrived at the end of the treatise that contains all these things. I began to review it in order to put it into the hands of a printer, etc., and then I was disturbed by the case of Galileo. Descartes responds to the situation of Galileo here and gives an apologetic for his own philosophy. So he'd written about a lot of stuff in a book that he did not publish, and instead he published this book, which was a more impressive piece of political and theological rhetoric. The sort of thing he could write and get away with it, while saying some really interesting things. In fact, his dualism as an abandonment of the old hylomorphism, that vocabulary term for pre-modern metaphysics, is actually a stunning attack on the official teachings of the Catholic Church that he claims to happily belong to and accept all its teachings. Back in part, oh goodness, where did he say he accepts the teachings of the Catholic Church? Part 3, the religion in which by God's grace I'd been instructed from my childhood. Okay, so part 6. Part 6, what does he do? He says that this new philosophy he's given us can be totally awesome, and here's why. And basically, in a nutshell, what he does here is he says it's practical. He says his philosophy now, his new foundation for knowledge, I exist, therefore, etc., God exists, therefore, etc., reason exists, reason is reliable, the senses can be trusted, etc., and other minds exist because why would God give me this tendency to believe other minds exist if they don't, etc., etc. This is a foundation for everything else that we can know, and this is a foundation that can establish a practical science of studying the world, and this foundation establishes his theory in metaphysics. Maybe that would be up at the 4th level of knowledge. And his Cartesian dualistic metaphysics tells us that the world works according to mechanism, matter obeying a couple of laws of physics, and all of this establishes our ability to study the world, learn how its different parts work, study the physical world, learn how physical things work, and make them do what we want. Descartes says his philosophy establishes our ability on a solid foundation to make ourselves masters and possessors of nature. He says we can use my philosophy to fix up the world the way we like it. Now, this tells us that his provisional code of ethics in part 3 of the discourse is not kept, at least not in its entirety. Now, I think actually we do keep some of it. I think we do still change our desires to fit the world where we must. And where we must is death, because there's nothing you can do to keep the human body going indefinitely. But Descartes' new ethics is to change the world to fit our desires as much as we can. And other than death, how much can we fix? Apparently just about everything. Long life, perfect health, and whatever the heck we want from the world. This is what we can do, Descartes says, with my philosophy. This, he advises we get to work on. And he even asks for some money. He says most people could help someone who's working on this stuff by making a donation to him. It's very entertaining once you catch some of these references. All right, chattered about this long enough. If you've actually watched this far, thanks for watching. Email me with Descartes comments and questions, or just post them on YouTube like you usually do. Email me at Plato and Augustine@gmail.com.